First, a quick look at the issue and how they mandate evidence regarding the effect. According to Mandela Effect, indirectly deduced by its conception of what constitutes proof. 1. If there's no evidence to reflect the change, that is proof of change. 2. If there is evidence, they'd say it's residual from a parallel reality, therefore a proof of the change. It is incorrigible. The opposing premises leave no room for refutation. The implications are 1. Humans have perfect memories and never forget things, since the change is due to nothing else but a parallel or some other kind of paranormal reality change. This implication through this rationale necessarily follows. Otherwise, how would a Mandela believer in the rationale decipher between changes? Based on memory? Based on opinion? And who yells that opinion the loudest? That's merely an argument from incredulity. The reality shift must be true because I feel it in my being to my core, in my soul, is something you'd expect to hear from the effect believer. 2. Nothing then can be deciphered as change from time, aging, or the intentional or inadvertent hand of humans and nature, since memory can't be argued as word against word, and true change is relegated to reality shifts, as in implication 1, then no natural or organic change is real either, implicated by Mandela Effect. And 3. Both clauses are false, therefore the prerequisite for evidence for the Mandela Effect is invalid, because the effect's rationale creates an irrefutable conclusion by so-called proof of a positive and negative. Casual rebuttal will at first not be enough. Mandela Effect hijacks all outcomes. If you dispense a refractory sequence, you leave no natural countering alternative to the assertion. Further, showing the flagrant nature of how they insolently treat evidence. Luke, I am your father, for example, having not existed in the original handwritten script we see online, they use as past evidence to prove he was always so. Meanwhile, the original script that shows, "Build it and he will come," on the contrary, they say, changed because of Mandela Effect. So using evidence, according to them, proves the Mandela Effect or doesn't when convenient. All representatives, whether they be physical composition, a record, a print or photo, accordingly follow the Constitution as antecedent and contingency. This flagrant idea to justify evidence of something remembered simultaneously in existence with a new version of it is so-called residuals. As I explained earlier, this is a misguided notion. All intention, memory, design, forethought, emotion, feeling, sensation, ideas, person, events, in short, everything preceding is part of its history. This is overlooked when unmindful, and we note this when Mandela Effect believers have evidence right under their noses and miss the implication. If reality supposedly shifts, all relevance, that is, its entire world, must adhere to the final thing in question as part of the new reality. A person or thing does not exist independent of reality. It isn't a prop that can be transferred between multiple realities, since it is part of a specific chain of events. It is the reality. A thing defines a reality as reality defines a thing. They are mutually and intimately tied at creating one another, as one another. To declare something interchangeable with a so-called alternate reality takes the essence of reality for granted, as a fiction. To suppose something separate from its reality as if mutable and replaceable with any sequence of cause and effect is to intrinsically deny it, to void it. The corollary is, residuals are a fiction. These residuals, the violation understood by Mandela Effect, cannot possibly exist in the sense of metaphysical or paranormal shifting. It is an ontological impossibility that loses all frames of logic. I think the terms simultaneous evidence instead are more appropriate, since it's not about finding specific evidence that directly and definitively tells us Mandela Effect is nonsense, but more about finding this implication. The Mandela Effect believer will say that one person remembers something one way and another person remembers it yet a different way, and that basically illustrates the effect. Two individuals are having two distinct memories because of the experience of two distinct parallel realities, rather than two individuals are having two distinct memories. Yet again, logic is lacking, since reality, as defined by its cause and effects, despite illusions or hoaxes, cannot possibly coincide with another, since only one is experienced and realized according to defining parameters. How do we know this? We know by implication, because nobody holds two alternate memories of one experience, save for what is believed in their minds. Otherwise, that's absurd. That is why we are here, mainly, is it not? We have differing opinions of a given memory that oppose one another. Specific perceptions, experiences, and memories define the reality we believe, regardless of what is reality, that is, the intact causes and effects, until the facts ultimately confirm or show otherwise. Reality is not a reference point of what is potentially true as an array of premises, but as what is true. What is believed as true implies one reality experienced by an individual. Despite not being representative of reality, mental concoction roots due to reality. Coherence allows for incoherent thought, any thought for that matter. Potential is no container of attribution. Attribution arises only from what's real, even when the attribution itself is fictional. Any skewing of actuality that does not coincide with evidence is then an internal event. Any deviation of what is believed as true is merely an internal event based on error or oversight of implication. Keeping in mind perception of realities by the brain having been shaped by the one reality as well, it cannot possibly have awareness of another reality, excluding a psychological experience. If reality has shifted, so have all precedents that birth and create the final object in question. It comprises all precedent and contingency, which includes the individuals and memories. You can't simply cherry-pick what goes and stays. There is no nexus point of converging realities, for that would expel memory as actual. The mere idea is utter nonsense, like trying to make sense of a time-travel movie. Pure fiction. We allow this fiction and its illogical violations but for entertainment purposes. One must understand that in the instances where Mandela believers want to use these types of simultaneous evidences, Mandela Effect is instantly debunked. Simultaneous evidence or residual evidence in the true sense of the word only proves change, not reality change. Reality change is nonsense, since the thing that references it comes from it and vice versa. As previously mentioned, worse is the fact, some Mandela Effect followers present pieces of evidence voluntarily that show both a remembered thing and its changed version, on one physical medium at that. It's comical they hold refuting evidence against their own claim. They discount debunking ironically while unknowingly present it. One must understand this concept to fully appreciate the impossibility of this so-called effect. Throughout this presentation, you'll notice I still refer to quote-unquote residual evidence as part of my argument in refuting Mandela Effect, however, only to placate, to then allow the evidence to disprove the effect practically, even when its existence already debunks it. Using the evidence ultimately, that is, after having first overcome the falseness of the so-called effect, it indeed shows good proof of change, or no change, in a very practical, human, and earthly manner. We enter this with the understanding the absurd premises of Mandela Effect already debunk it, and we will humor each case presented to us as proof, but refute it as anything but legitimate proof. We achieve this in part by showing underlying error-prone behavior. So, essentially, there are two levels of refutation. One, inherent, though overlooked, comes with the idea, the philosophical case, as we'll call it. Two, perpetually we go along each example, admitting the so-called evidence only to illustrate it fails to prove, or in fact disproves, the Mandela Effect through its implications. A paper trail, therefore, only exists if we acknowledge things change because humans change them or they degrade. The other possibility is there is no change at all and based entirely on human error. For example, a photo of something from the past appearing different than the present because it was changed. It didn't just magically change itself. There wasn't a timeline shift. This difficulty leads to a logical conclusion and, most important point, granting the Mandela effect as something real and true denies antecedents and contingency, therefore reality, making it fiction. Since all things proportionally shift in total, memory, included in all things, must follow and without exception from events of relevance. Every waking moment should appear to be normal, functionally speaking, to the individual, including change, if any. A sense of fracture from reality, the assumption of a metaphysical change or shift, should be considered an internal event, that is, psychological event. Not to say external pressures or force can't influence the internal. There is no literal break from the reality itself for any constituent of reality, i.e. nothing, even if speaking hypothetically of reality shifts, can break from that reality. Only perception breaks from reality. This effectively proposes parallel reality as an unnecessary appendage, one that has plagued theoretical science for some time, and I think fills in gaps of what science can't yet figure out. It's a necessary evil that was created to fulfill other misconceptions, and naturally one would find it in crackpot theories, such as Mandela Effect. The interpretation of quantum mechanics is another impediment that hangs over us. It arises from certain effects and is then assumed a particle can be in several places at once, let alone based on a perfunctory assumption of the existence of the particle in and of itself. The interpretation is assumption feeding assumption. It takes a mature and sincere perspective to attribute truthfully quantum world observations more accurately to life as it is, rather than using the assumptions based on its interpretation as that which defines life. Without getting too deep and out of scope, if we consider the quantum world even through the popular interpretation, then should we not realize the subatomic world ultimately holds the quote-unquote pattern and forms the structure, that within the complexity of real-world structure, what we call and experience reality as erected through the subatomic world takes care of itself, that there is nothing unnecessary to assume about it? In summation, 1. The belief of this effect necessarily objectifies the rest of the world and individuals around them, including oneself, where it is as if the objectified are at the mercy of the whim and confirmation bias of the belief. This includes the believer as well, but less so within the framework of their rationale, because they accept and supposedly have distinct memories to confirm this effect as real. They, of course, have this special privilege. 2. It's precisely that rationale that adds to the incredulity of Mandela Effect by assuming this special privilege, this special position of exception for the believer. And 3. Assuming the belief to be true, the relevant causes and effects are disrupted, as well as the defining parameters for reality, let alone parallel reality, again if we were to humor it momentarily. The only way one can be aware of or observe change without paradoxically violating reality is by normal terrestrial, human or organic change. Any change, whether in secrecy or revealed, another topic altogether, where no other reality but one that defines all, but the memory remains and contains the change, is realistic change. You know, that old-fashioned idea, if somebody changes something, we'll observe the change because they changed it, and we know it by comparing to the previous version. I know, it's a crazy concept. But that's the insanity of this all. If somebody changed something in your house, you come back later to discover the change, and rather than think, ah, so-and-so must have changed this earlier today, you instead think, shit, reality must have shifted, and that's why I'm remembering this thing a different way. Now, instead of just you, picture a whole group of people simultaneously in the same insane sequence. Now you have a common collective memory with missing information and an impetuous and false conclusion. And I'd wager that most followers of the Mandela Effect will not even consider this absurdity. Just go on YouTube, for example, and note their vehemence and reluctance to listen to reason, with an absence of critical thinking. Even in the presence of evidence, reason, and obvious absurdity, they will persist. You know, a box of cereal possibly had a name or design change. I'd better call the paranormal experts. Incidentally, debunking the concept residual evidence as how the Mandela Effect camp understands it then leaves us with simply evidence or simultaneous evidence, as we said. To me, their desperation clearly shows, since the only evidence we do see that is bandied about them showing what they believe to be true is usually photoshopped. I wonder why.